our week 3. We will be exploring Principle 1, providing multiple means of representation. So, this one is a little bit more attainable as far as goals in regards to how do we adapt and modify for curriculum and instruction for differentiating, because it is about the representation of things. So, by consciously thinking about the way in which students learn to categorize things from what they see and what they hear and what they read, we can better the process by which we deliver content. So, here are our outcomes, tasks, and everything's due by the end of the week. The collaborative group discussion will be two-part, and I hope that you enjoy it as I will be participating as well. The explanation and rubric for that will be given to you um, within the actual assignment. Let's get started. So, for this unit, you needed to go back to the original text for Universal Design for Learning, and go to pages 14 through 21. They focus on Principle 1. I encourage you to simply read those because they will help center your focus, and to be quite honest, it's a lot. Um, each of these principles, the way that they break them up, uh, it it will take a lot of consideration. So, by only focusing on certain aspects of the text, I figured you would have less of a cognitive overload and more of a precise engagement activity, far as how you connect uh, what you read to what's due for the week. So, for this module, we are going to look at these two comprehension questions. What are the guidelines and checkpoints for Principle 1? And what are the checkpoints for Principle 1, and how do these elements help the educator better align the integrating of the principle? Sorry about that. Typo here. Um, okay, teaching while in action. Okay, so Principle 1, in a nutshell, talks about learners and their difference in the ways that they perceive and comprehend information that is given to them. So, for example, sensory disabilities, blindness or deafness, learning disabilities, dyslexia, or language or cultural differences, and so forth, may all require different ways of approaching content. And most of you already know this, however, sometimes we miss some of the, I would say, cultural and language differences beyond ELL. For example, a cultural difference between African American students and typical students who are Eurocentric would be vocabulary um, access. So, depending on their household and their access to dialogue and what type of dialogue is had in the classroom or had in their household, they will learn about 50 words or less compared to their peers, specifically the more dominant race. So I mentioned that to say that matters, especially when we are using language or using um, items within the classroom that students may not be able to grasp, even if they speak English, they may not actually be able to comprehend what is being said. I learned that out of professional development in another state I was teaching at. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That kind of stays with me. So remember to think beyond just the basic representation and beyond the ELL student, because there's other things that, or other challenges that students from different cultures may face in processing even a shared language that we all have. Next thing is for this particular guideline, one, provide options for perception. So the idea is that everyone can learn. They just need a different way to see and process the content. So it says here, to reduce barriers to learning, it is important to ensure that key information is equally perceptible to all learners by providing the same information through visual, different modalities, so vision, hearing, or touch, and then providing information in a format that will allow for adjustability by the user. So the touch one is kind of hard for me because texts are typically not something that I can change that much, but I'll work on that one. Okay, so guideline one, checkpoint 1.1. So this is a very long PowerPoint. I am not going to go through this entire PowerPoint because it would be like an hour lecture, and that's just not fair to you. Cognitively, it's too much. By the time you get to this, you will probably be getting ready for Thanksgiving weekend or the holiday break if you do not celebrate Thanksgiving. So you will already be trying to wind down, as I will, from a very um, fast-paced quarter two. So I will only briefly talk about the checkpoint. It will be your task. It will be added to your to-do list to go through each of the actual checkpoints within detail. And it is the reading, but separated visually so that you can have an aid to go back to when you decide what checkpoints you're going to apply. And then those checkpoint areas, the implementation examples are critical for me to see that you know how to apply this principle. So guideline 1.1 or guideline 1 checkpoint 1.1 offer ways of customizing the display of information. This may be difficult if you don't have access to technology. So here, the size of the text can be different, and students can request that the contrast between background and text or image, and then the volume, video options. Like I said, that one might be a little trickier because if you don't have access to technology, then obviously that won't be possible. But I don't know. Surprise me. We'll see what happens at the end of the week when you upload your lesson plans. Checkpoint 1.2 offer alternatives for auditory information. Use text equivalents in the form of captions or automated speech to text. Provide visual diagrams, charts, and notations of music or sound. Provide written transcripts for videos or audio clips. Visual analogs to represent emphasis. Provide visual or tactical equivalents for sound effects. That too may be a challenging one if you don't have access to technology. But I'd be curious to see how you give that one a try. Checkpoint 1.3 offer alternatives for visual information. This one I think we use the most. So provide descriptions, text or spoken for all images, graphics, video, or animations, and that would be through alt text. If you're using a picture, you'd want to make sure that you actually did the alt text process. And if you go through Word, it actually allows you to shape the document for accessibility. So all you have to do is kind of click on the search button, and then you can click on accessibility, and it'll show you how to do it. I might add a link for that so you can have some supports. It says use touch equivalents. Like I said, this one may be a little bit more challenging if you are not in an elementary preschool setting. It says provide physical objects and spatial models. Also provide auditory cues for key concepts and transitions of visual information. Next, we have guideline 2, provide options for language, mathematical expressions and symbols. So that includes these 5 checkpoints. Clarify vocabulary and symbols, clarify syntax and structure, support decoding of text, mathematical notation and symbols, and then promote understanding across language. Lastly, illustrate through multiple media. So I think this one is the one as well as the checkpoint that we might use a lot of, but I will say that for math in particular, this one is super important. And excuse me if I sneeze, I have allergies and the weather's changing again. Guideline 2, checkpoint 2.1, clarify vocabulary and symbols. Here's some things that you can do here. And then we have some implementation for clarifying syntax and structure. This one in particular, I think we use a lot of. It says clarify unfamiliar syntax or underlying structure in diagrams, graphs, illustrations, extended expositions, or narratives through alternatives such as the ones that are listed. And then we have checkpoint 2.3, support decoding of text, mathematical notation, and symbols. I don't think we use that enough. So I would encourage you, if you are a math teacher, to really strengthen your teaching with applying that one, because I have a coworker who's a math teacher, and she always says, the students don't really understand, and I'm like, I don't think they're decoding what you're saying. And the problem with that is they're not making a connection to what they're seeing or what they're hearing. My time is almost up, but checkpoint 2.4, promote understanding across languages. That one can be done with the use of different ESL um, strategies or other language strategies that, no, ESL um, or ELL. But depending on the cultural dynamics associated with the language challenge, you would want to maybe seek some alternatives. Like me, I use Google Translate for communication with some of my students, and then I um, actually use the audio and the written text to make sure we have a clear understanding. And I print the slides in Spanish. Guideline 2, checkpoint 2.5, illustrate through multimedia. Check that one out. Guideline 3, provide options for comprehension. This one I think is very important because checkpoint 3.1, we're required to do this, activate or supply background knowledge, highlight patterns, critical features, big ideas and relationships. That one is a big one that we often miss. Guide information processing, visualization, and manipulation, And then checkpoint 3.4, maximize transfer and generalization, which is difficult if we don't actually take the time to connect those relationships. For this guideline, you could take a look at some of the things that are left here. I think all in all, chunking is the key. I think we sometimes give them too much and expect them to sequentially process things, and some students don't really know how to learn that way. So we have to be intentional about how we integrate what we're giving them and then how we're teaching them through the scaffolds. And then finally, here, checkpoint 3.4, maximize transfer and generalization. So some of the things I was speaking about. Finally, here is an overview of the actual guidelines. So the challenge with each of these is that they have 3 areas within one principle. The one principle then has additional checkpoints. So please don't get confused and don't get overwhelmed. Use this PowerPoint as a guide for you to better understand Principle 1, and we'll spend all week in Principle 1 with nothing else, and then we'll move on into Principle 2. It will be fast-paced, but at least you'll get a little bit of time to kind of assess this one. Well, I hope that you have a pleasant break, and I also hope that you enjoy your week before you're off.